So in this video, we're going to talk a minute about Android. This is a video that I've thought about doing for a while. I've watched a ton of videos on YouTube talking about the differences between Android and iOS, and this fanboy or that fanboy trying to decide or trying to talk about which one's better and which one's not. I'm going to do something a little bit different in this video. I'm going to first state my position, and then I'm going to only cover the things that I think are a problem for either of the iOSs or either of the OSs. So the first thing I want to talk about is my position. So I started out on iOS years ago when it first started. I switched over to Android primarily because I totally dislike Apple. I don't like the company. I don't like their arrogant attitude toward everyone that isn't Apple. So I switched over to Android. I was kind of excited at the time that Google was getting involved and that they were, throwing their hat in the ring and coming out with something. I tried Android I was probably on it for about 2-3 years, and then I switched back over to iOS, primarily because Android is very, very buggy in comparison to iOS. In fact, I'm shooting this video on a Samsung Note 8, and before I could even get the video running, the thing wouldn't start. I kept clicking the record button and nothing was happening. I don't know, and this is about the third time I've done the video on the phone, and I've had the sound get completely out of sync with the recording. So it's still, even, this is 2019, and the thing still is buggy compared to iOS. And on my iPhone that I have, I've got an iPhone XS and or 10s, and everything on it just works. I mean, I don't think I've hardly had any problems with it at all. But anytime I get on an Android phone, I'm constantly having a fight with it to get even the simple things to work. But we won't really get into that. So my position is I don't really care which one of them I use. I really don't want to use Apple. I'd like to use Android. But I always end up coming back to Apple because I can't find anything on Android that actually functions correctly. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is iMessage. There's a huge debate, and everybody likes to make fun of it. Between Apple's got the iMessage, and Android doesn't really have anything, and that's very true. The thing about the iMessage, though, more than anything else, is that everything works on it. Number one, it's secure. Number two, no matter who I send a voice message to, or I send a video or an image, they get the full image, the full video, whatever it happens to be. I don't have to worry about limitations in the texting engine, and also it's secure. Because it's encrypted, and so I don't have to worry about the telephone companies getting all my text messages and holding on to them. So there's that. Now, Google has made a few attempts to try to solve this problem. In fact, the number one thing I guess I could say about Google and its attempts to solve any problems is that while they are very innovative and they come up with a lot of new stuff, they're also probably the biggest company to quit on almost everything they come up with. Google, the search engine, and YouTube, which they own now, those are probably the two big things that they continue to operate. But you're really not guaranteed that they're going to continue to operate either one of them. They're all the time getting into stuff and quitting. And a good example is the text messaging. We've gone to Google Plus and Google Hangouts, and all of the iterations of things that they've tried to do to solve this problem. And so my question for Google with relation to iMessage is, why not iMessage? Why not come up with something that is exactly like iMessage for Android? You've got a lot of other projects that you have running. Why don't you just solve this problem? Instead, they have gone to the telephone companies and they're working with them to come up with a solution, but it's not going to be encrypted. It's not going to be secure at all. And they're relying on the telephone companies to support all of this. So we're back to, all of the phone companies having to support it, and then all of the phone companies to support it. Why not just do what Apple did? Even if you charged a little bit for it, it would be a solution. But so we get a subpar solution to the problem with iMessage. So iMessage on Apple, definitely hands and above better than anything Google's ever done on Android. So the next thing I want to talk about is the App Store. And there's a big thing running around the internet right now on the App Store, and how Google has surpassed Apple with the number of apps on the App Store. I'm just going to give one example of something that kind of, I think, points out the whole problem with Android and its App Store, and the fact that they're focused on the number of apps that they have on the App Store, where they should be focused on the quality of apps on the App Store. So my example here is that I have, and I'm going to pull this up. Actually, let me get the right one. I have a video here, I think, that I copied over here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so this is a video that I go in and I search for hacker news. This is a very simple little app that allows me to view tech articles and things that have been posted on the internet. It is not a big deal. But if you look at Android and start looking for hacker news, you'll find tons and tons and tons of examples of hacker news readers. Instead of just one like you have on iOS, there are literally 20, 30, 40 different apps that all do the same thing. None of them are the actual app that I have on iOS. I have no idea who wrote these things, which really gets us into the next problem with Android, is the security. Everybody likes to say that Apple's a hard ass, and they watch everything that you're doing in the App Store, and that's kind of true. But I know that when I write an app for the iOS, it's going to get reviewed. It's going to, they know who it is that's posting it. I have a license. I have to actually pay for the license every year, and so there's a process to it. So is it a pain? Yes, sometimes, but I at least know that when I download an app from iOS, from their App Store, that it's going to work, and most likely it's going to work, and that someone has at least looked at it to make sure it's not stealing my credit card numbers. Android has none of that. Android, anybody that wants to get a developer license and start posting apps to the App Store can go for it. And so what we end up with is an App Store that, in my opinion, is completely useless. Unless I'm looking for a mainstream program that I know the company that I can look for, it's very difficult for me to find an app that works. There's just hundreds of them, and the fact that there's got to be 50 hacker news apps tells you that everybody else that went to look for a hacker news program thought that they could do a better job than the one that was already up there. I would never consider writing a hacker news app on iOS, because the one that's there works really well, and it works, and I can trust it. So the App Store and the number of apps, definitely on between iOS and Android, you really can't even get into a comparison. And then when you start talking about the quality of the apps, this is going to kind of lead into the next problem with Android, is the OS. I have a Galaxy 8 that we're actually recording this video on, and it hasn't gotten the latest version. We're now in 2019. The iOS, are you shitting me? So I was going to record this video all at one time, but the Android telephone evidently can't continue to record video, so it turned off in the middle of trying to do the video. Another example of Android. So, and I'm sure there's probably some magic setting that I can find that will make it not do that, but anyway. So we were talking about the OS updates, and so I've got a fairly new telephone, not brand new, but fairly, to me, new in the iOS world. A 2-year-old phone is definitely should be getting updates, but the problem is that every single phone manufacturer that's out there has a different opinion of when an OS update ought to go. So the latest Android update it came out in August, the 1st of August, and we are now at the end of January 2019, the next year, and I still don't have it on my phone. Um, iOS, when Apple releases an update, you literally get it that day. Everybody gets it. It's not something that I have to wait for some other company to decide when they're going to grace me with the ability to update my phone to the latest OS. So, in that respect, if you're going to buy an Android telephone and you do want to try to stay up to date on the updates, I would only recommend getting a Google phone. I don't think I'll ever buy anybody else's phone just because I want the latest and greatest stuff. I don't want to have to wait for Samsung to pull their head out of their butt and decide that it's okay for me to update my phone to the latest OS. So, but that kind of falls in with the App Store. So we have this complete mess of an App Store that has hundreds and hundreds of apps for the same purpose. We have an iOS that we don't even know what the latest version is on any telephone. And so now I am going to go from writing apps for iOS to writing apps for Android. And we're going to have to think about this. Like on iOS, when I write an app, I can fairly certainly pick the latest 2 releases of iOS, and I know that 99% chance of anybody running my application on an iOS device, it's going to be one of those versions. It's anybody that doesn't have one of those versions has run a phone that's 4 or 5 years old, and at that point, I really am not interested in trying to make my app work on their device anyway. So, but on Android, you can't know that at all. You could have a phone that's 6 months old that is 3 versions back on an update. It just depends on how rapidly Google releases updates and the fact that no phone manufacturer can be trusted to actually apply those updates. So it really, and from what I understand, even on my Note, which is probably, well, my Note phone is as expensive as my iPhone XS, and yet it doesn't have the latest update, and from what I understand, it's not going to get it until second quarter of 2019. By then, I'll probably have another telephone. So it's ridiculous. I will never buy another Samsung phone, no matter how good they are, just because I know that they're never going to keep up with the updates. So that is another problem. So you've got the app developers that are developing applications for iOS and Android. 99% of the time, the Android app is either ignored or it is behind the releases of the iOS. iOS apps almost always come out first, and it's because it's easier to program on iOS. It's easier to make sure that I'm going to get that app and get it out on the internet. There are apps that I run on my iOS device that I cannot run on Android because they don't even exist. The companies that write these apps have decided that Android isn't stable enough for them to warrant writing an application for it, and so they don't. And so I'm kind of forced into this iOS world, and I don't want to be over there. I want to be, in a more open environment, and which will end the video in that is the companies. So Apple, arrogant, they don't listen to hardly anything anybody says, and they try to throw down whatever they think is the most stable thing, or the next big thing down our throats. MacBook Pro 2017-18, perfect examples. Those computers suck. They're the worst computers Apple ever came up with, but they try to tout that they're the best thing that the world has ever seen, and it's just not true. But at the end of the day, Apple makes money selling hardware. So they have a reason to spend the time to make sure that their hardware is the best hardware that you can buy. So it behooves them to, at least in some degree, pay attention to me. The Google, I can quite honestly tell you that Google doesn't care one iota about any of us. All Google wants is your information. And so them getting into the telephone market was a perfect example of them wanting more information on you than they had before. Before, they knew what you were searching, what you, to some degree, what you were buying, but they had no idea what you were doing with your phone. And now they know where you go, where you sleep, where you spend the night, where you work, that what you're eating, what stores you're going to. So they got into the market to spy on you, and so, you know, as much as I want to get off of Apple and switch over to Android, it's still a bitter pill to take, because I'm going from a company that I don't like because of their arrogance to a company that I don't like because they just are not a good company. They have one goal in mind. They don't make hardware. They make advertising. They sell advertising, and that's what they make the majority of their money with. So everything about them is to spy on you to be able to sell you more focused advertising. So, you know, at the end of the day, I'm I use iOS as my primary device for all of the reasons that I just stated. I want to switch over to Android just to get away from Apple, but I still have the problem with the Android and the Google and all of the other things that go along with using Android.